President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has thrown his weight behind the creation of state police in Nigeria, citing the need for more effective security measures to tackle rising insecurity across the country. The president has urged the National Assembly to amend the constitution to allow states to establish their own police forces, arguing that decentralized policing will improve national security. While some have expressed concerns about potential abuse of power, others argue that state police will bring policing closer to the people and enhance community participation in governance. As Nigeria grapples with escalating security challenges, the proposed state police initiative has sparked intense debate. Will it be a game changer or a recipe for disaster? Let's now turn to security analyst, retired Colonel Tony Nyiam, for answers now as he joins us here in the Lagos studio. Good morning, Colonel. Good to see you again.
Thanks very much.
Colonel Nyiam.
Thank you. Sir.
State police. Will it be a game changer or a recipe for chaos?
I
Simple
think
question.
It's a step. It's a step towards actualizing the slogan, let security be everybody's business. So far, the police system we have is one that is fit for, I would call, a colonized people, in the sense that the police is virtually, appears to be, in most places, an army of occupation. In other words, the police in an area is not indigenous to the area. For example, I stay in Lekki. One of the best security outfits people go for is the OPC. In other words, here by OPC I mean the Odua People's Congress. They are people who are locally recruited and locally managed. This is the nature of police in other parts of the world. Police, usually, the responses to crimes which are local. And usually, police are usually local based. For example, my second home, which is in Edinburgh, in Scotland, the police is local government based. It's not a federal, it's not a national police, or it is managed and funded by the Scottish. So in effect, police, we must remember, is a civilian service. It's not a military force. What do I mean? Whilst we welcome what the president is doing by going towards state police, that does not remedy the gaps in our national security architecture. But I must say, I commend the president for being the first to have made this move. And the indications one gets is that he's going to go ahead with them.
All right. Yes, like you mentioned, and the new Inspector General of Police has actually, one of the first things he's done is to put a committee together to steward, midwife that process. But I want to ask, just following or continuing with Dr. Basu's question around recipe for disaster or game changer, and that is some of the bottlenecks or roadblocks have already been identified, some of the risks, one of which has been consistently said is the politicization or the overreach of governors if they do have the powers of state police in their hands, that some of them can use it as a target for political reasons. What are some of the safeguards that must be put in place to ensure that this is minimized or doesn't happen? And then there's the issue of funding. There are some sub-nationals cannot stand alone. They are dependent on FAC allocation. Thankfully, under the Tinubu administration, there's been an increase, but that's due to this particular administration. We don't know what would happen with the next president or the like. So, how do we ensure that these are put into consideration in designing the state police framework for Nigeria?
First of all, let me begin with the first point you made about how do we ensure that governors don't use the police as their tool.
Yes.
Now, I think that question means that I'm suggesting that in addition to the police committee,
Yes.
there's a need for policing experts committee, which is why is the committee under the IGP would deal with the operational part of policing. On the issue of the Governing Council of Police, or which is called the Police Service Commission, that cannot be left to the police because it will be a conflict of interest if you ask the policeman to decide how. So I think what the president is a good step,
yes.
But what the committee now should be addressing is police operations.
Okay.
But as to the Governing Council that addresses the concern you are raising, there is usually in other countries, there is an independent police service commission. And this is why you find even the Prime Minister of Israel remember, he immediately leaves office, he's going to face the police because he has no right to interfere with the police in Israel. He does not appoint the commissioner of police, even in the UK, or even in the UK, Canada, Australia. The Police Service Commission usually independent. In Scotland, for example, where I was one time chairman of the ethnic group in Scotland, by virtue of that,
yes, you sit on that board.
Yeah, I was able to sit on the board.
Yeah.
So, and the board is made up of the citizens.
That's true.
You have the clerics,
yes.
You have the trade unions, you have the law, all from
religious leaders, community
indeed.
leaders sit on it.
It's not so the government does not appoint, the executive does not appoint police bosses as we do in Nigeria. So that's why one would suggest that there's a need for a complementary committee to understudy countries that have several police, like Australia, Canada, India. I spent some time with the Mumbai police to understudy it myself. So I think that is essential. That addresses the issue. And then the other question you were asking.
About funding. Some states might not be able to provide. We've talked about the welfare of the police, for instance, a number of times.
One of the things the president is trying to do is that, for example, what qualifies a public administration to be a government is to make laws and to have its own law enforcement agencies. To the extent that the states now do not have that law enforcement agency, they are only governments in name. So the implication of your question is that if an entity cannot fund its own police force, is that entity qualified to be a state? That is the issue. So, but having said that, I would have expected that the windfall we're having from the US-Iranian war, there should be a lot of money which should be used for helping to set up this state police force. And more than that, what is more important, because before Nigerians would say, I don't think even if you set up the state police force, they can deal with the state of insecurity we're facing. Because the level of the security challenges we're facing are beyond what is called grave emergencies. They are threats that are dealt with by forces. And that is why, even in the US, it is not that there is no state police in the US, that there's a National Guard. In other words, this first step is welcomed. The next step is that the federating units need to have their own military forces in their different, to provide homeland security to their different areas.
So you're calling for National Guard here?
Yes.
That's what you want.
Yes. The word National Guard, because in Nigeria, we tend to mix the word. Over time, national seems to appear pan-Nigeria. No. In the West, when you hear the word national, you have the Irish National Party, the Scottish National Party. It doesn't refer to, it refers to really to an ethnic or to a people.
Okay.
So the origin of National Guard is actually the guard of the homeland of a state.
Okay, but if you go back to the history of the National Guard, the context was different. The reason, originally they were militias.
Pardon?
They were militias.
Yes, indeed.
And they were militias because they didn't want an overarching, force to be able to take over, states and all other things. That's how they came about.
That's it.
I mean, his historical context differs with us.
Sure.
In our own case, our path to independence was not their path to independence.
Sure.
They have laws that support people having ammunitions. We don't have laws like that. And I get, the decision power you're going to talk about. But I want to play devil's advocate that is it really a problem about boots on the ground, the problem of insecurity or the complicity of the security architecture? Because take, for instance, we have over close to 400,000 police officers, 63,000 NSCDC, Civil Defense Corps. After you have that, then you have many arm-bearing institutions, NDLEA, Navy, military, and all of that. Then as we speak today, you have Amoteco, which is in the southwest, which has like a core of close to 12,000. Almost every state has one scheme or the other, Zamfara, Ibabeagu, and all of that. All of these people bear, light arm. They might not bear your Kalashnikovs and they like some machine guns, but they bear some arm. So as we speak already, we have multiplicity of arms in the country, but we can't still solve the problem. Is it not the complicity and bolstering on intelligence that will really crack this problem of insecurity? Because when we keep saying, and to further my argument, I was talking to somebody yesterday that the person was telling me that all the criminals in society, people know them.
That's it.
But they don't bring them forth because there's an ecosystem of corruption where everybody benefits.
Sure.
So should we tackle because if we have state police without tackling the complicity,
Good.
we're not going anywhere.
You've been using the word complicity. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, about 5 times.
Yes.
The existing national security structure is a compromised one. Because over time, it was serving a hegemonic power. It wasn't serving the people. Now, it is then necessary to have new security forces which are state-based, run by the people, to complement, to deal with this complicity. Now, for example, if you have a policeman all the way from my state and is posted to a lucrative place like Port Harcourt, he's gone there part of it is to make business. So what I'm trying to say is that the existing structure is fraud engendering one. So you need to let the people...
But the problem is, sir, that's the culture.
Sorry?
It's already the culture. So why you bring in a state police in this cultural architecture that is fraud endangering, they will just continue in that stead.
No, because if you bring in a police that is, for example, take Obalande, for example, the police there are from Obalande people. If the DPO there has a problem, he will be affected because he has a stake in his community. But where you now have a situation we have now, you have someone else from another place who is posted to a location where it's lucrative, and the person makes money and then goes home and builds a beautiful house in his place and is clapped for. The system now encourages corruption. So I think that it's not an issue of corruption will always be there, but you have to allow people you'll have to allow the police forces or services I would use accountable to those they serve. You see, in a place like Edinburgh, for example, the people fire the police commissioner if he's not working. But in Nigeria, locals cannot fire their police commissioner. So the system we have now it encourages corruption, and we are so deep in corruption.
Okay, Colonel.
Sure.
Now, state police is not a new concept in Nigeria.
Sure.
We've tried it before.
Sure.
But the issue is this time around, what do you foresee could be the challenges? Because most people are focused on challenges, the politicization of the state police, funding and all those challenges. You are talking about money coming from the windfall, expected windfall from the Middle East crisis. Well, not many people are as optimistic as you are.
There's no money.
We can't take the windfall. Best advantage of it. And in any case, even if there's any windfall coming, you know our politicians and their conspicuous consumption. So maybe you moderate your optimism in that regard. Then the other challenge will be one of structure. I think you use the word structure. And that will be in terms of the relationship between subnational police and the federal police. Particularly now that the present IGP has seized the initiative. He has set up a committee to work out the modalities. Federal police, they will work in their own favor, I suspect. So those two issues.
No, I think that's why, that is one of the flaws I find, that the IGP should not be the only one to set up the committee. There should be a complementary committee, which is to address the issue of, because we're now going to have the federal police and another tier of police. We need a committee, or a larger committee, that addresses how the two forces work. In fact, all I think the center needs is to have an inspectorate of the police services that would come up, so that for enforcing standards. But I think every state can afford its police, because a country like Grenada of 200 citizens has police force. So why you see, we keep on saying that the police cannot. No. If a country like Togo, which is some of our states are wealthier than Togo, I think let us try to give the people the challenge to the people, because it's better to have a police force that is accountable to the people than a police force that is accountable to Abuja.
All right, thank you for that. And just about funding, because I'm hopeful that some of the challenges or concerns that have been expressed, we can begin to talk about ways to, maybe mitigate those risks, so that we can actually see, state police come to being. When it comes to funding, is there a strategy that we can work out? Let me use an example, far-reaching. For instance, the TED fund, there's a percentage, there's a funding structure for it. Is there a funding structure that can be adopted for state police to guarantee? Because if we have a windfall, the war will not last forever, for instance. They will still need to get money somewhere. Is there a funding structure that is, that can serve long term, that is sustainable?
Presently, if you watch all the vigilante groups, all the so-called bodies about, they are all raising money.
Yeah.
But the money is being raised, is going to people's pockets. So, if you appoint, if we have a police that is accountable to the people, that system would ensure that there would be ways of raising money to fund the police.
We have a culture of accountability. Because this challenge of accountability, is not just at federal level, even at state level.
Yes.
We have a challenge where we don't have accountability. So are you optimistic that if we do have state police, the governors will be more willing to be accountable to the people?
No. You see, India, if not with the new prime minister, also was corrupt. In fact, I saw corruption there in some part of Nigeria. But there was still a system. The first thing is, I think we should try what has worked in other places and see. And also, we should try to trust Nigerians. The issue is that Nigerians have always not been part of the system. And I think if you allow the Nigerians to take responsibility of their police forces, at the moment, Nigerians have no say in their place. They have no say who is appointed the IG. But in this system, the police will be appointed by the people. In other words, the Police Service Commission will not be responsible to any executive. That's the structure.
But in terms of funding, even the federal police is not well funded. So how do you expect the state police to be properly funded? I mean, so these are the fears. It's still going to go back to the personal conviction of who the governor of that state is. Take, for instance, look at how Akeredolu pushed Amotekun. I mean, so should we leave it for a structure like that? Because if you have a case where the federal police is not even properly funded, and you expect the state police to be funded, and it's haphazard, so what are we even talking about? But the complicity I was talking about in my earlier point is not complicity like you termed it. It's complicity that our security forces have been infiltrated by nefarious elements. I'll give you 2 instances. To today, we can't still tell who told the military to leave some minutes before the KB girls were kidnapped. Secondly, in Woro, people sent messages to the security architecture that these people said they are coming, and the criminals get to know about it. That's still the prime problem. When are we going to be able to do an intelligence sweep in our architecture to read of those people? Because I do not believe the Nigerian military cannot fight this insurgency.
No, because the armed forces is already compromised. The police is already compromised because for a long time, they've not been serving the people. The loyalty is always to who is their leader. Now, how do I point out? I think I will answer this in this way, that if you connect the dots between the objective of what we did in April 1990 and one of the goals of Trump's intervention in Nigeria, you will get that it's the same enemy that we're still facing. In other words, Nigeria has not been a country free. It's been a country that has been essentially held hostage, virtually, by some neo-colonial powers. We don't like to face that, and any attempt to try to tackle with that neo-colonial power, any leader becomes a danger.
All right. Okay, thank you so much for your time with us today, Colonel Nyiam. I know that this is a conversation that is ongoing, and the hope is that we will be able to find a solution to the internal security challenges that we currently face in Nigeria. And if state police be the way, so be it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.